Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. And in this video I'm going to do a super quick and easy Necromunda stroke 40k gunk tank, or could be used as a fuel tank depending what you do for the transfers later on. So in my last week's video I built the ash waste ridgehauler and I left some of the equipment loose in the compartment. I decided I wanted to do a fuel tank for it. Turned into a gunk tank, you'll see later. Now I found in the house something absolutely ideal, a pot of oregano, and it was nearly empty, so I asked the wife to buy a fresh one, and then I stripped all the labels and everything off it and began the process of turning it into a fuel tank. Now, stripping the labels off took actually quite a long time. Used a scourer which scuffed up the plastic, which actually probably helped later on. Now, in terms of mounting it to the vehicle, when you look at the container that normally goes in here, it's mounted on what looks a bit like I-beams. Now, this is just a simple plastic kind of I-beam thing that I bought from a model railway shop for about £1. Now, before I did any cuts, lots of measuring, checked where I was going to put these beams on the pot itself, so it would slot into the vehicle, and measured to make sure it would go past the kind of support struts. About 5 centimetres was about right. Glued them on into sort of 4 equal spacings, and again tried to get the spacing so that it would slot into where I wanted it on the vehicle. You'll see that a little bit closer later. Now it's about making a support frame. I've put some support beams down the middle. You can see it was off camera though, unfortunately I didn't capture it. Now I need to get those angles right. Now you could do some super high-tech way of doing it. All I do it is I'm eye-fitting it as to where I want, and then painting the lines on so that I can cut to those lines. And then I use this one that I cut down as a bit of a line guide for all the other beams that we fitted in, and quite thankfully it worked quite nicely. Fitted in to be that support strut from the beam at the bottom and into the tank, and it wasn't too difficult. There were a couple of little bits where they were maybe slightly larger or smaller. I had to maybe tweak them around a little bit, but nothing too overly difficult, so it works quite well. And one of those £1 pieces did this whole thing, and I've still got a little bit left. Now it's the accessories. Now again, on my ridgehauler last week, if you watched it, I didn't put the gunners on. So if you've got that sprue and you've done the same thing as me, then this is a really easy way of fitting a hatch into the top, more like an access hatch. I'm not going to put a gunner on it. This is an access hatch into that tank. If not, I'm sure you're bound to have a vehicle sprue knocking around somewhere with an unused hatch you could use. Bit of green stuff mixed up on the bottom to seal it on, because obviously it's a round container, and we're going to put it on flat and then just press the green stuff in so it holds it for one, but also it gives them that support piece in. Now this is a cast up piece, actually of a kill team bit of scenery. I do a lot of casting, you'll see on the channel, using blue stuff and things, so you can check the video out and do the same thing, or just find yourself some sort of computer terminal, which I've done here. I've sliced this off that cast up bit, and on the other end I've put the fan into the other end of the gunk tank, because I'm figuring that out in the ash wastes, gunk would need to be kept cool, so it's like a cooling fan. Now I searched sprues again on a Horus Heresy sprue. I found the end of a flamer that goes in the dreadnought, and just use that as kind of where I'm going to tap off the gunk to be drained out. Again, using a lot of the previous week's builds spares, I did not put the handles onto the Munitorum armoured container because I just don't like what they look like, and that left me with some brilliant ways of making the access hatch up to the side of this gunk tank. So I cut them down, I cut the pegs off the end that would normally slot into the armoured container, and just using a pair of tweezers, because these are very small and fiddly, just glued them into there to make the kind of access ramp onto the top of the container that I imagine they would need to use to access to, check on the level of the gunk or whatever. And I glued 6 down the side, and that leaves me actually with enough spare still on those sprues, either for a totally different project or if I fancy building another gunk tank for a scenery piece later on. So it works quite effectively. Now if you look very quickly, you'll see that access hatch has flicked round and is now facing the other way. I realised that I was then going to put a little bit of panelling on, and it would make sense for the open section of that hatch to be facing the way it is now. Thankfully this was a very quick build. I only spent about 20 minutes, so that was still dry and I could spin it round. So I've used a bit of plasticard with rivet markers on to make a little walkway from those handles up to the hatch. Now I made a sausage of green stuff with the same green stuff I'd mixed already. Used a Green Stuff World textured roller, the tentacle roller, to put the grooves and things into this pipe so it looks a bit more interesting. You can do this with a comb if you don't have the roller. Then I glued the pipe in place, tucking it underneath the barrel to kind of keep it out of the way so that when I put it into the vehicle it wasn't going to knock around too much. Now I wanted a nozzle at the end, and this is just off a Horus Heresy kit, and this is the end of an auto cannon that I'm never going to put onto the dreadnought because I've glued the weapons down just to make it a bit more interesting. Now that is the kit bash done. That was all in all about 25 minutes, so a very, very quick, simple kit bash. just need to leave the green stuff to dry overnight, and then it's the paint scheme again, which will come down fairly quick. I sprayed it black, I sprayed it lead belcher, start off with metallics, it's really nice and easy, and the first stage is using the grell and earth. Now this is something I've really got into using over the last couple of years. It's a crackle paint from Games Workshop, brilliant to make your paint look cracked and damaged and whatever, which it would do because this is a very old, out in the underhive kind of trekking across the ash waste kind of piece of equipment, so I wanted to do that, and I put it on in random patches. Now in hindsight I've actually put more on because I think it didn't really show too much cracking in the end, but you know, a little bit or a lot's your choice. Now I went on to Word on the computer and just knocked up some little symbols that I then printed out in a couple of different sizes. Now I'm using the smaller size I've used here, but the large one I might use actually in an Underhive kitbash later, and I've called it Sump, the company that obviously make this stuff, and it says on there Premium Underhive Gunk, which actually I was really happy with the little signs I made, but I do make a couple of mistakes when I put them onto the model. If you've watched the channel previously, especially with my Necromunda Underhive scenery build where I use the Zone Mortalis terrain, I put the paper printouts on top of the scenery after all the ink washing, after all the painting's been done. I PVA them on and then I weather them individually, and that's definitely a better way of doing it. What I tried it this way around, just to see if it would work more than anything else, was sticking down the sort of posters first. That was a mistake in hindsight, and you'll see why. So I'm sticking them down, PVA glue on the back, and then just pressing them onto the model, and then PVA layer over the top. Now ordinarily I'd say leave this, you know, overnight to dry, but actually it's so hot at the moment, it was hitting 30 degrees, that this actually dried really quickly, so I could carry it on in the same sort of day and session. So I've just roughed them up as you see there. I've just sliced them with the hobby knife, cut pieces out, cut chunks off, just to make it a bit more interesting. Now unfortunately I cut a piece out above where it says Premium Underhive Gunk, so you've lost the N in the case. You can't really say what it says. That's another mistake. If you're going to make a poster like this, keep it so you can tell what it is you've printed on the poster, otherwise I suppose why bother. Now it's just in terms of the basic painting. I'm not going to do anything super here, just a few basic colour schemes. I'm going for red to represent the kind of fuel kind of look, and just layering it down. One thing to bear in mind, this is a different plastic than you would normally have a model made out of. Glues together fine, no problem, but it did seem to take paint differently to normally, so I had to water it down a little bit more than I ordinarily would. Now it's just some detailing where I've cut out the paper on those pictures where it says Sump, just painting little lines of blue in there where we're doing for the scratched off metal. You can see I've left lots of patches of metal kind of showing so that it looks damaged. I've also put a little bits of red over the poster itself to kind of blend it in and looking like the paint's worn and showing some red. Putting a bit of brass effect in a few areas and painting that pipe black just to show that there are a few sort of variant colours there, but that's really it. I don't want to do anything too complicated. Now it's the ink wash stage. I'm putting down a very dirty Vallejo sepia wash, my particular favourite. I use it all the time for everything, just to really dirty down the model. And this is another mistake here actually. I put that wash over everything including the paper, and it makes the paper too dirty, so you can't really tell too clearly from a distance what it is it's saying. That's not a problem, you can get up close and have a look, but I do think it would be better to have done this after I'd finished painting, and it definitely made the next layers more awkward, because now once you're in the ink wash it's about bringing those colours back to life again. So going round with the red we've used that I'm kind of stippling and dry brushing on to bring it up, to get rid of some of the streaks that have occurred, again because the wash, especially in the heat, it handled itself very differently to normal, so I had to do a fair bit of recovery work on this because it dried far faster and put more streaks down. Would have definitely been easier to recover this if I didn't have these pictures in the way. Now because of how the ink's dried on the paper, I did do a little bit of touching up work on there just to make some of the lettering stand out a little bit more. So taking the red and painting over where it says the Sump part to try and bring it back to life a bit. Now I am happy with the overall effect, I'm not saying it's bad, but it would definitely have been better to have put these posters on after I'd finished the paint job, and that's a definite learning from this. But look, every time you learn, that's always a good thing, and I won't make the same mistake again. Now going up to a brighter red, just to add a bit of visual difference again, and put a slight highlight layer into the model. And I stopped at the two colours because then with the initial red we used with the ink wash, and then this secondary red, it does look like there's 4 or 5 different red tones on there. Now I took a nice bright scorpion green, just to, again, lift up a little bit on that poster, because I've put them on there. I do want them to stand out a section, and look, I am pleased with the final effect, but it definitely took more work doing it this way than sticking them on afterwards. So Absolute learning there. Now, because it's a gunk tank, I wanted some gunk, and one of my absolute favourite Games Workshop technical paints, Nurgles Rot. This isn't to represent Nurgle, I'm not bringing my Nurgle obsession into Necromunda, but gunk is going to be shiny and green, so we've used that, put on a few patches to look like it's leaking a little bit or it's dribbled out onto the walkway and the steps. And just a final bit of detail with some Vallejo rust wash, just add a couple of colour patches in. And that's the gunk tank done. Fairly quick and easy. In total, probably about 25 minutes of build time, and I would say about an hour of total painting time, on top of the 10-15 minutes it took me to make the posters. So a fairly quick build, although spread out over the course of a couple of days for drying time. So quite happy with that. Gives me a nice alternative to go in the back of the ridgehauler. I think fits in, is quite evocative, and you know what, for the cost of it, it was minimal, you know, £1 or £2 for some of the pieces of equipment. So yeah, I'm really happy with that. Hope you enjoyed it. Try doing it yourself if you want. You can take some of these techniques and do it in a much bigger, obviously, fuel tank. And if you did enjoy that, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in another video.